Cool. We're on. Welcome to the Athletes Health Podcast here, talking to athletes, coaches, leaders, anyone we can learn some of these tips, tricks, tools from, lessons in the mental game, the mental performance, what I really do here with the Athletes Health. But with that, one thing that I'm really starting to preach the message of is what we learn from sports, but then also how it entails to life. And that's really kind of what I saw with the TILL360 and my guest here, Curt Slater, that I want to talk to you guys about this and kind of what you guys are doing at TILL360 and how you got involved, Curt. But that's probably enough of a quick intro for me about you, because the guest always can introduce themselves better than I can. So I was wondering if you could introduce yourself a little bit, tell people who you are, and then we'll just kind of get this conversation going.
Yeah, well, thanks, first of all, Gabe, for having me. My name's Curt Slater. I grew up in a small town in Dayton, Minnesota, and I played a lot of sports. I was really good at sports, so it's interesting your concept and how this ties in. What I found out real quickly in the game of sports was the kids that had more opportunity for practice and timely feedback got a lot better than other kids, right? So, I mean, I always tell people that, when I became a dad and all those things, like what was interesting in sports is I knew early on it was all about reps and that timely feedback. And it's also true about life and education. So, notice the impact I had in sports with younger kids was really my calling where I went into education. Played basketball at Morehead State, got my elementary ed license, became a teacher and a coach. I always wanted to coach. So I love coaching all sports, but just really that opportunity to watch athletes grow. And after 30 years in public education, I kind of found my calling with public speaking. I'm pretty good at talking, making people laugh, making people cry, making people think a little bit. So about 5 years ago, to the date of what we're talking today,
Wow.
I started a with Joe Beckman called TILL360. It stands for Teach, Inspire, Listen, and Learn. We don't really work with school districts or organizations until we really listen and learn with what's going well, and then really talk about maybe some areas that we need to inspire and teach some better practices around. So just moves away from this one and done strong keynote. It's kind of like I remember going to really good camps, and I always could tell people the great camps gave me skills to do in my driveway that I could get better. And the bad camps were a lot of fun, but I didn't really walk away with anything I was supposed to do the next day. So it's always kind of that, what are your marching orders after things? So yeah, TILL360 was born. We travel the country. I do majority of the work I do is around the professional development for educators, looking at systems and practices that they're currently using in their school. So I know that you have a lot of listeners that are on the sports theme, but I always ask people, like, what is the foundation of a good workout? No matter what sport you're in, what's the foundation of a tier one strong workout? And what we find out is that if an athlete's not doing that well and they're just spending their time, like, I always remember a lot of the athletes I worked with just want to spend time dunking the basketball, which I get's a lot of fun. But then the amount of dunks that you get in a basketball game is probably less than probably about 3% of your time out there. But if they're not working the fundamentals of the layups and the free throws and all of that, it doesn't matter what a great dunker you are. You're never going to become that athlete that you need to be. So that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. I knew a good amount of that stuff, but I didn't fully know about all the coaching and stuff and everything that went into that. Because I knew you've been like the principals and the dean of students and kind of that route, but I didn't really understand. I didn't know the full length behind it. And so what got you into like TILL360 itself, starting it with Joe?
Yeah, so it's a funny story because I was on I left education before COVID hit and really loved the opportunity to do professional development. So I was working with the University of Minnesota around a project called I Am 4, and it's really a tier 2 intervention to support kids that might be struggling with the game of school. And then I was also at that time working with the state of Minnesota around something called PBIS, which is Positive Behavior Intervention Support. So I had a lot of opportunities of reps to get out and work with different schools in the state of Minnesota. And Joe actually reached out to me on social media. It was on Twitter. and just kind of said, "Hey, I love the stuff you're doing. Would love to connect with you sometime." And so he actually lives down in Chaska, Minnesota, and I live in Anoka, Andover. And
Hmm.
so he drove up, and we were talking, and he was telling me what he was doing, and then saying, "Hey, would you ever be willing to recommend me to other people?" And I'm like, I'm sorry, Joe, but I won't even hire you for my own school." And he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "You're kind of like the yo-yo guy. You're the one and done. You come in, you make everyone feel good, but I don't. What are you leaving me behind with? What do I get to do with as a leader? What will my teachers be able to do to follow up around the human connection?" And that's where, and Joe and I laugh about it, but that's where where he started to recognize, like, yeah, I could do better work with this. Um, so it was probably about a month later, his business partner reached out to me and said, "Hey, we want to have a deeper conversation. Want you to join our team." And just so you know, at that time, they're called the Happy Cavemen. And I just said, "I'm sorry, but if we're going to start a company, it can't be around cavemen. Like, yeah, cavemen, like, even if you're happy is great, but they didn't treat people very well." And, kind of like the caveman was, just excited about, surviving and
Fire,
stuff like
yeah.
that. So that's did a summer retreat and really just talked about kind of our what I call the pillars of our
And
company. And it
is that
is
what's
really like
behind
you
you or
can
no? I was wondering. Is
uh,
that what's behind you or no?
those are just some phrases
Okay.
that as I travel,
Okay.
I have a poster that comes up with, and again, Joe wants me to create a keynote around that. But yeah, I can send you the image. We have a bunch of marketing things over here. My other side is the slogan I have for "I Fight for Kids." That's my why. When people ask me, why do you go into coaching? Why have you, went into this? Is that I want to fight for kids the way that some adults fought for me, in the sense, because I grew up in a very dysfunctional home, so my story resonates a little bit different. Like, I wasn't good at the game of school. So like when people hear today and I go back to my class reunion, they hear what I'm doing, they're like, "We would have never thought that you were ever going into that," because I just spent so much time in the hallways cleaning erasers, standing in corners, sitting in the hallways. I just struggled, but a lot of that I struggled because people don't recognize there's a certain skill set you need in order to be good at the game of school, when it comes to that. So,
So there are a couple things here that I really want to reiterate to you, Kurt, because that's what one thing that you said about even Joe coming in and like, well, you're gonna do the speaking thing, but then what's gonna be after that? Is I think what really stood out when I first saw TILL 360 too. I saw all the materials you guys bring, and I think that's when I talked to Tara about how else you guys do everything. And that's what really kind of hit home with me because I had the same concept. Like, what's the point of going to do one speaking thing and then leave the message there and everything else? It's almost like going to the doctor and getting told to do this, this, and that, and then that's all you have, right? And
mm-hmm.
that's what I really kind of like to see about what you guys were doing and why I wanted to hear so much more about this. And then the last piece you said about the why and like the kids in the school, the school, right? What kind of got you over that hump or like made you start to do all this things? Like what switched in that path, that journey? Was it the athletics? Was it like or what like what was it? That's what my first assumption was, but I'm really curious if everyone else thought,
Yeah,
"Oh, you how are you doing this?"
yeah. And people have asked me that question a lot, and I always, as I reflect and go back, I definitely think that it was a group effort. I mean, I look at back at some of the teachers that really had a chance to see my strengths, and build me up. But no matter how many times I go back to this question, it is my wife, Kim Slater, my wife, and I met when we were in high school. So we're high school sweethearts. I met her when I was 16 years old. A great story. Another going back to. I'm about 6'7", shrinking, so maybe I'm 6'6" now. But my wife is also tall. So we were both playing basketball, and I didn't know her yet, and she didn't know me. And I was sitting, and my feet just kept growing. So like when I was a kid, the teachers always made fun of me because like when I was 10 years old, I already had a size 10, and then I was 11, 12, 13, 14, and went all the way up to I was 15 years old. I have a size 15 shoe. And so my parents just kept having to buy me shoes because kept getting blisters on my feet when I was playing basketball because my shoes weren't big enough. So my mom bought me a pair of shoes, dropped them off at Anoka High School. So I was lacing them up, and my future wife sat down and started saying, "Hey, can I help you?" And she started lacing one of the shoes, and she said, "Hey, every time you lace your shoe, I want you to think of me." And I was listening to headphones, the different headphones back then that had cassette tape, and I was listening to REO Speedwagon. And I was listening to a song, and I think it was like "Will You Remember for the Rest of My Life" or something. I think that was a song, and I put those on her head and say, every time you hear this song, think of me. And we've been married for 30 years, but she was the one that got me out of the riffraff, right? Like, I mean, the one thing that I challenge athletes that are listening to this is that when I was in ninth grade, I was really good at the game of basketball. And so I was moved up to where the juniors and seniors were. Well, juniors and seniors had different things on their mind, different, paths and avenues. But I was always kind of the sidekick. I was always there. They had to pick me up for practice and stuff. I couldn't drive yet. But I just got early on what I call the riffraff, just kind of like wanting to fit in, that peer pressure. And, with Kim and her family, it was just a different lifestyle. And I truly believe that people constantly kept telling her not to go out with me because I was a bad egg and, he's not your type, blah, blah, blah. Even Kim's mom thought that when I first met her. Uh, and she's my mother-in-law, which I love her. But um, I was constantly proving myself. I think that's what really started to challenge myself, is I was tired of being labeled as a jock, tired of being labeled as a difficult kid. I was tired of being labeled as a dysfunctional family, and I just said, I can do better. And with luckily a couple breaks in my life, but to be a whole nother episode. Like, what I do want to tell people listening is, when you're part of a dysfunctional family, and for me it was alcohol and drugs with my family, you're attracted to other alcoholic and drug addicts. So I went to Morehead State. My college coach was an alcoholic, recovering alcoholic. Again, not a good situation for me to be in, but you get attracted to those type of situations because that's where you feel comfortable. And so that I've just kind of fought that my whole life, is I have to be really careful on what I'm attracted to, because it goes kind of back to, how you were raised and your family values and some of those things. And I love my family to still today. And I don't think I'd be in the place I am without them. But it's also, I have to recognize, like, some of those things that have happened in my life are not always healthy. So, but yeah, that's what I believe made it over my hump, is Kim Slater, 30-year, have 3 adult kids. They're all married and starting to have grandbabies, but she's my angel. She's the one that rescued me and definitely got at a plan, and she was part of it.
Wow. I have a feeling you tell that story at least sometimes, right? Like that's no, not many people have that story of the past. So that's
I
pretty
Well,
interesting.
and I'll tell you what. Kudos to you for asking, because I only tell people that ask. I don't put it in any of my
Yeah.
keynotes. I don't tell it freely, just because I think sometimes when people ask authentic questions, but I think that sometimes if you say it too often, it becomes just a show, right? It becomes just part of your show, and that definitely is not one where I show my cards very often when it comes to kind of some of those things, because I think also the hard part in the professional world of administration, education, is letting people know that you've struggled, right? People always want to be picture perfect. Everyone always wants to be like, oh, it looks like this, but I always tell people you can really get a good level of trust with someone when they're at their worst and how they respond, versus a constant always being at like picture perfect at her best.
So let me ask you this, Kurt, because I'm getting the sense with talking to you that you've been around the block a time or two, like more than I even saw when I was researching stuff about you in TILL360. And one thing that I always kind of know, or I like I have a poster up here that is just all biases and stuff. But one huge one is like your past and how it translates into what you're doing now and where you are going. But what you said of what you've done in the past or where you've been raised and everything else, that's really what attracts you. I've never fully thought about it like that in that sense. Like I've always thought about past biases and shaping where we're going. But that the attraction piece of how we're growing, like for instance, when you went to your college with the recovering alcoholic coach, like that is a perfect example. And as you've kind of been through your journey, what are either like those biggest impacts around that of like the past biases and but also like how it shapes the future? And I feel like you can definitely use that for good as well though too, and shaping like where you're heading, what you're gonna go do and everything else like that. So I was just wondering if you like had any stories about that or any just examples, any kind of peace of mind of those past biases, like dive a little deeper into that aspect.
Yeah. Well, my dad passed away 2 years ago. And what I want everyone to know is I forgave him. But growing up in a alcoholic home, I was physically abused till the age of about 14. My brother was more verbally abused. So what's crazy about my family is I'm 6'7" at my highest. My brother's about 5'10", 120 pounds. And he's my older brother. So when anyone ever sees us, he always introduces me as his little brother, and they're like, "What happened to you?" But I think having that relationship with my brother my whole life, he's always felt not enough, right? He's always felt like I'm in Kurt's shadow because I was good at basketball, good at football. And so I think that what's interesting growing up is that I told myself when I was going to have kids that I would never physically hurt them in any way. Like, I mean, I just said I'm going to break that chain. And I think that's where sometimes people have to ask themselves is like, hey, when growing up in your life, what's one thing you wish you could go back and kind of wave that magic wand over your family and say, hey, I wish this one happened? We don't have that, but we do have the ability to break chains. And so I always tell people like breaking chains for me is some of those habits that I wanted to make sure that my kids didn't experience. Now, the hard part about breaking change is sometimes I was not able to involve my kids in a lot of my family, my personal family's events, just because I didn't want them to be around it. For
Hmm.
all of the listeners, even though people become recovering alcoholics, my dad still had a lot of dry drunk episodes where he would get very angry, upset, those type of things. And I just didn't want my kids around that. I wanted them just to know happy grandpa, right? Just kind of that
Yes.
happy side and have to see that other side. Um, the other thing that really challenged me is that I recognized the discipline, and it isn't, and I think that's an interesting word. You could do a whole episode on this.
Yeah.
The word discipline. It's like when you think of an NBA player. I love your jerseys hanging behind you. An NBA player that has discipline on the basketball court. I love it when a player gets a foul called on him in the NBA and they kind of raise their hand or nod. Yeah, I got him. Versus what you constantly, I'd say 90% of the time you see is complaining, right? You see, but yet we're having little kids watch basketball and then saying, hey, when you make a foul, you should raise your arm or just something, recognize that the foul is on me and just, accept the feedback you're getting. But what I recognized in discipline in school was punishment. Whenever I was not good at something, like if it was a class activity, sharing resources at recess, sitting in the cafeteria, eating my food, whatever it was, if I wasn't good at that, the instantly discipline I experienced was removal. Just remove them from that setting and put me somewhere else. And so when I went into a teacher, when I went into administration, I really challenged myself to look at consequences versus punishment around behavior. And so whenever you talk to a kid that throws peas across the cafeteria, of course there's a discipline problem, but is there a punishment? And the traditional thing that would happen in elementary school is if Gabe threw a handful of peas across the cafeteria because they're squishy or he didn't like them or some kid made fun of him, whatever the reason, what's the natural consequence that a teacher would give or a paraprofessional or a culinary express person? They would remove that child from the
Yep.
setting. And so if that worked and a kid was not playing good defense, well, then the basketball coach would just take them out of practice for the next 5 days, stick them in a room by themselves and say, you suck at defense, so you're going to sit in this room for 5 days and you're going to think about it. No coach would ever do that. But we easily do that back with discipline. So I've been a disruptor in education around looking at discipline from a different lens. And the lens should be more proactive when we're talking about discipline than reactive. we should be teaching kids what we expect, and we should also teach kids when they're not doing what we expect to look at some of the reteaching, because what we do know is more majority of us want to be successful. None of us wake up in the
Yeah.
morning and say, "Hey, Gabe, I hope you suck at delivering packages today. I hope you suck big time." And you're like, "I hope I suck too." I hope that people yell at me. I mean, every morning we try to wake up. Now, there's times where we're not very good at what we're doing, but then it comes back to that opening of feedback. So, yeah, my ultimate passion is that we can do better for the kids that show up every day that maybe don't have the same home support that other kids have, and not label them as at risk or trailer park trash or whatever people want to label kids why they can't learn, but really recognize that we have the opportunity to create that change. And again, that's a shout out to all the teachers. And when I say teachers, the one thing I want you to know, Gabe, is when I think of a teacher, I think of our bus drivers, our secretaries, custodians, paraprofessionals, culinary express, any adult that has the ability to influence a child is a teacher. And I should really say anybody that has the ability to influence a human being is a teacher.
Hmm.
In that, and so that's where I get upset a little bit when I deal with people and they're like, "Well, I'm just this, I'm just that, I'm just this, I'm just that." I'm like, "No, you're that, and you could have a really positive impact if you want, or you could just downplay your role."
No, exactly. Because the teaching thing, I mean, that goes, and it's not even, it's the human exactly, because it's not even just in youth or adolescence. It's the whole lifetime. Like you're teaching me some stuff right now, Kurt, and that's why I like it. And I was just gonna tell you super fast. Yeah, these jerseys. I don't know how much you follow NBA, but this is Keegan and Chris, because I went to Keegan and Chris Murray, because I went to high school with them. So I still talk to them every once in a while, and they're the exact silent people that they'll raise their hand, they'll stay the discipline to put in the course and everything else. So that's why I really like to hear that from you and hear you kind of connect to all of it. And the other thing I like that you just said so much was the analogy to the sports and the athletics to exactly in the school, because like you can think back to the kids, or maybe they're coming from the not as good areas or whatever the case is, but exactly if they're in the sports, if they do something wrong, they're not going to get pulled out forever or like for practice and just be put on the sideline. They'll get kind of coached up, taught up how to do it better. They might have to go run some, I've seen that, but they're gonna at the end of the day they're gonna be put right back in because that's what they need. And I love hearing you say that in the essence of how else do we do it and disrupt the system. Because well, you probably don't know this, but like we have a therapy dog living at my house because I'm at my parents' house right now as just graduated college and making things work. But my mom's a counselor, and so like we have a therapy dog, and it's awesome. And to hear all those stories, it's crazy. Of just Ash, the dog's name is Ash. She's a celebrity at the school, let me tell you.
I,
But one thing, and I want to get your perspective on this because it is what we just talked about, and it could relate back to that discipline. Is I was talking to a soccer coach lately, and he was saying how he came from not the best areas, but he had to hustle, 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 and really work at what he was doing. And but then there'd be kids that would come from maybe like the much better off areas, right? Like around where I'm in like Cedar Rapids, Iowa, there's definitely some nicer areas and not nicer areas. And he was like, the kids who I know that are like from the nicer areas that don't have to work as hard, like they're not going, I tell them, you're not going to make it to the pros or the MLS. Like you just don't have that drive. You don't have like the push behind you to make it out. He's like, but the kids who really have the struggle, they have that drive to make it out. But I say all this because I'm wondering from your perspective where that comes from, what you guys are doing now at TILL360, where you are disrupting the system. Because I feel like at some points in that system, it doesn't always help the like in the lower areas, like get out of it, get that drive to get out. There's more humps. And I feel like with what you're doing helps kind of keep going, or gives more support for that instance. You know what I mean?
yeah. Well, and I think it goes back to, so one of the models that's used in education, and first of all, say thank you to your mom for what she does as a counselor. I love counselors that embrace their job, but then also embrace going, "Hey, I don't have all the answers, but I can bring in a therapy dog. I have two a yellow lab and a chocolate lab underneath me here, and Waylon, my 2-year-old, easily could be a therapy dog. I mean, he's just so gentle, but he's also pretty good at pheasant hunting.
Yeah.
So, um, but the thing I think is interesting is like when you think of the foundation of a professional athlete. I just think it would be just so fascinating to, and I don't care what, if you're going to take the NFL, if you're going to take the NBA, if you're going to take the major league, whatever you pick. But if you just would ask players to be like, what is the core foundation that you need to have in order to build your skills to become a professional athlete? And what I always find fascinating from my perspective is that when you look at a family like the Mannings, Peyton and Eli,
Hmm.
when you look at their family, their dad figured out that he's played the NFL, so he figured out that formula, and now you can even see the nephews and some of the other ones are able to make it to a high level. When I would also tell you that I don't always think they were the best athletes, probably at their high school. There's probably other athletes like, yeah, I could have beat that person or that, but I didn't have. Going back to what you said, I didn't have the work ethic. The number of athletes that I played basketball against that were better than I was, but just didn't have the heart. And that's one thing I talk a lot about. Like, I believe my heart was a little bit stronger than other athletes' hearts because of the pain and suffering I had to go through as a child, right?
Hmm.
And I didn't always get that love. I didn't get always parents at my game. I didn't always have a ride to the game. I didn't always have a ride home. But going back to what your coach or the per player you're talking was the hustle, right? I figured out solutions. Like there's never a problem that I have that I can't figure out solutions. They're not always healthy solutions, but I can always come up with, hey, you have this problem. Your car's not starting. Try this. Try this. I'm not going to be like, I don't know what to tell you. You should call someone that cares, right? Because I care. I want to kind of create that. Um, so the one thing that we spend a lot of time with teachers and administrators and districts about is what is that core one foundation in your school that's going to drive teaching and learning? So if I go to you and say, hey, Gabe, you just got done with school, let's just do a quick K-12 activity. So kindergarten through 12th grade, tell me that teacher that just had an impact on you still today. When I say to you, you still remember how they made you feel. You remember the things they used to do in their class. You remember their name. What was that teacher? And I'm really asking you this. What's that teacher's name?
I'm thinking this is probably more so the coach it wasn't one class, but he was like in the success center, and it was Coach Schwartz. You could look, I think he's retiring now, but Coach Schwartz.
What's his
Coach
name?
Schwartz.
Coach Schwartz. Okay. So Coach Schwartz. And so this is my next question I'd say to you. So Coach Schwartz, what skills and traits did he have? What do you remember about interactions with him, no matter if he was in the success center, if he was coaching, or if he just ran into him at the Casey's down there in Iowa?
Oh, he was always intrigued in what you're doing, always willing to help out, and it was always about the process and everything. I mean, I could talk to the cross country team who just had probably the best season of all of the school history this past year. And it's always, I mean, they'll tell me too, it was always about the process for him. Like he always would say brick by brick. So it was probably those things. He was always interested and always cared and always trusted the process. Thank you for listening in and watching the Athletes Health Podcast. I just want to put this on your mind here. Upgrading the mental side of both the athletics and life, tying it into the physical stuff that we are doing. Come 2025, our mental gym is going to be revamped to studio level video quality, and our worksheets, everything will start to be licensed out to organizations, to schools, places to implement this. If you want to check out the mental gym, let me know. Otherwise, we got our online community where we are diving deeper into these deep dive subjects each week, live Q&A with the online community group where you can ask any questions about any of your teammates or anyone in the sorts, and we can hash out those mental sides and elevate the game in the online community. Otherwise, our one-on-one coaching is still leveling up. Let me know if you want to be a part of it as I keep taking on more athletes, coach them on the mental side, and sharpen their skills very specifically to their needs. Otherwise, keep enjoying this free content. I love to help you out, give you the value. If you want a little bit extra sauce, check out the weekly newsletters every Sunday. Free trick and tool on this topic that only people on the newsletter get. Check that out at the website, theathleteshealth.com. Thank you for watching and leveling up your mental game.
All right. So what you're talking to me about, what I hear just coming alive from Coach Schwartz, is relationships, right? He's always asking a little bit more, like, what are you up to, brick by brick? He stays connected. So my question goes back to schools then, to go to a West Des Moines, to go to a PCM out there, high school, and say, hey, tell me what you're doing for relationships. And then I just say tier one. What are your teachers doing on a day-to-day basis to build strong relationships with kids? Because we know that 98% of educators can agree that a foundation that is built on education is a relationship, And so people start saying some things that they do, they recognize them, they can say their name, they go to maybe some of their events. But I say, so let me ask you this. How do you create a better environment for relationships to grow? So I had a hard time forming relationships because I didn't trust a lot of adults based on my upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a lot of adults that made promises to me that never fulfilled those promises. So I started to just look at adults as a bunch of liars. I'll take you to practice and then they'd never get up. I'll do this for you and it never happened. So I struggled because I didn't have an environment for relationships to grow. It wasn't that I didn't want relationships. It just wasn't the environment. So what we do with schools is we break those down to ask yourself, what are you doing around it to create a positive, nurturing, predictable environment? And to be honest, that's where a lot of schools don't have a lot of things in place. And it's surprising, but they don't. They don't have common language. They're not talking to kids in a common way to say, hey, Gabe, are you going to do your best today? Are you going to soar? Maybe the acronym SOAR is to be, you're an eagle
Yeah.
and you're part of the Eagles. And so how do you soar? And when I say that, are you soaring today, Gabe? For me, I'm asking and checking in on you to be like, hey, are you showing responsibility? Are you on task? Are you achieving? Are you recognizing others? So that's the part that I just find interesting, is that the amount of schools that have great academics, in the sense of they have learning targets, they have the right curriculum and all that stuff. But if you don't have the foundation of environment and relationships, kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it doesn't matter what quotes we say about that. And it's the same thing with you and I. If I thought that I was coming on your podcast and you didn't care, then I would probably not care also. But I can tell how much you care, how you rearrange your schedule to make this happen, why jerseys are hanging up behind you. You're creating an environment on your podcast for relationships to grow. And that's where I ask teachers that, again, we can talk about classroom management, we can talk about discipline, but if we don't have the foundation, and that where it goes back to that original question to professional athletes, if you don't have that foundation of what you need to be a professional athlete, you can't skip that. Because as soon as you skip the main foundation, it's like building a house on sand. It's just going to collapse around you over time, and you're never going to be able to build something strong because that foundation's not there. So you're always going to have a lot of chaos in your life, and then you're going to what's kind of going on. And it's that's that foundation. What is your foundation built on? And I say in education, it should be built on environment and relationships, and that's why I call it the ER of education. It's the ER,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you want to go to the emergency room and get the best, you better have a strong foundation in your ER, because you're going to be dealing with a lot of different issues.
Okay, that was really awesome, Kurt. So I mean, I'll just go back and I'll re-listen to it. But you made me think of a couple things, because I'm thinking one of the first reasons why, or one of the reasons why, I was doing all this was because I know of certain parents or coaches who say, oh yeah, all the other coaches, they're coaching the sport, right? They're doing the academics in school, but then that's the kind of all I know. They kind of lost touch of the team camaraderie of building up the environment for all the other aspects and everything else. So you really got me kind of thinking about some more things that I could be doing too. And as I progress the athlete's health in my business, but what I want to hear from you is a breakdown more of these tiers? Because I looked into them some, tier one, tier two, tier three, but I want to hear more from you about kind of those because you kind of covered the first one somewhat, or at least you labeled it. But I was wondering if you could break it, go in a little more depth into those because I think it would highlight quite a few pieces of what we've kind of already covered and kind of put things together, I think.
Yeah, so and I'll even name the tiers for you. So it's called MTSS, and what MTSS stands for is multi-tiered systems of support. Now, MTSS did not form in education. MTSS formed in the medical world. So back about 60, 70 years ago, I think was the start of it. But what they found is that grown men, and I can understand why, because I'm starting to become that person that they're talking about, had small medical problems, but they weren't willing to go in to the doctor. So, people were dying from colon cancer when if they'd have went early on, it wouldn't even have been colon cancer. It would have just been, some of their different, issues, a tumor in your colon or something like that, where they caught it
Yeah.
early. So the big thing with MTSS is that's where it was formed. So MTSS has a tier 1, a tier 2, and a tier 3. What it means, so here's what I'll just have some fun with you, Gabe.
All
You
right.
just got out of college, but if as you're looking for this amazing job and you're looking for a job that has good dental. So when we think of good, like you want to have teeth when you get older, my age, you want to be able to chew on things, so what's some tier 1 things that your mom and dad have taught you around your teeth? So if you go to a dentist, what are some questions they're going to ask you when you go see the dentist?
Have you brushed? Have you been flossing? Probably brush twice a day,
Okay, so they're going to ask you, Gabe, are you brushing your teeth? And you're going to be like, yeah, I'm brushing my teeth twice a day. Now, I laugh that you even brought up something because I went in about 5 years ago and the lady's like, how are you brushing your teeth? And I'm like, well, just like I was taught, and I'm just doing this. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to show you something. You're actually brushing your gums away the
Yeah.
way you're brushing. You should be a circular motion. I'm like, well, you better go back and talk to the 1975 show of cartoons I watched because they were brushing like this, right? I didn't know that technique was in. So for all your listeners,
Yeah,
so
that
they're
that
going to
just
ask you
happened to me
how
too,
often you
so I just had to throw that one in there for you.
Yeah. How often do you brush? They're going to ask you. How often do you floss? All right. They're going to ask you maybe like how are you getting fluoride? Are you drinking well water, tap water? I mean, they might ask you some of those questions. That's all tier 1, right? So now you go in, and a good dental plan will have that you get your teeth cleaned twice a year. Now, the reason you're getting your teeth cleaned twice a year is that the dentists know that that is good tier 1. Now, let's say you go in next week and you have a cavity. What do you have to go in now? Now you have to make another visit.
Hmm.
That's tier 2. All right, that's tier 2. You still get tier 1. They're still going to tell you keep brushing, keep flossing, keep doing these things, but you have to come in. We have to give you some Novocaine, or we have to do some of this. We have to fill this cavity in. And so that's the thing about tier 2 is when you get tier 2, you still get tier 1. Now, where schools were a little bit broke is like, let's say Gabe is my teacher, knows that I struggle socially, emotionally, and every day I come to school, I'm not usually fed all the way. I'm hungry. I'm upset. Maybe probably need some deodorant. And so what happens is, as homeroom is going on, you as my teacher, you send me down to the counselor, and I miss homeroom. So I
Hmm.
didn't get that opportunity to connect with my classmates and stuff because I need deodorant. I need this and that. That's going to have a gap right
Yep.
away, right? So what's happening is we're taking that student out of an area where they need homeroom, but they also need this other support. But we're actually taking away homeroom from them to go give them something else. And so that's where we see the disconnect when it comes to special education, when it comes to students that receive EL services. We label them. Gabe's a special ed kid. He leaves for math now. Nope. Gabe needs to stay in my class. I'm the math teacher. I know math the best. And Gabe needs a second dose of math later on, but should not be taken out of the main math class. And that blows teachers' minds up. Just like, what? Like he's not even close to having the skill set. It doesn't matter. He's still going to absorb some. Might not be ready for it, but he's still going to absorb some, and we know that he needs a double dose of it. So that's where things get a little bit with MTSS. It's meant to show you that even though you might have to get your teeth pulled because you have some rotten teeth. You still have the opportunity to get your cavities filled. You still have the opportunity to get your teeth cleaned. You still get all those services. And that's kind of the MTSS. And so your listeners, if they went and looked at MTSS, they're going to see a
Mm-hmm.
triangle. And what the triangle means is that if we're doing good things at practice, I always told people, like, when I ran basketball practice, here was my number one rule. Whenever I was running practice and we were doing skills, every player had a ball in their hand. Every player. So when I said it's time to go and we're doing layups, every player had their own ball. Every player was dribbling because it was time. We only had so much time in the
Yeah.
gym. Drives me crazy when I watch a coach do a drill and there's only one ball and everyone else is standing around watching one kid go and do a layup. Or let's say maybe they even have two, and so I've been able to, in my journey, been able to run some coaches practice and say time on task, right? Time on task. The more time we can give them on task, the more feedback they're getting, the more challenging. And I think that's the same thing with students in schools. We only have so much time with them. And if we're not really having time on task with them, and that's right, I talk to kids all the time. Like, what are you doing right now? I don't know. We're just waiting around. We're just waiting. The amount of weight, and this is not a rip on teachers, but it's just that whole part of like, boy, if you have time, what's your passion? What would you like to be doing? And that's where some schools are doing. It's called win time, what I need, but where kids have the opportunity for 20 minutes to really just pick something that they're interested in, as you've kind of started doing podcasts or some other interests that you have. So yeah, just some cool stuff there. But yeah, that's MTSS. So again, tier one, if you're doing great stuff in schools, 80 to 90% of kids are responding. If I'm doing great stuff as a principal for my teachers, 80 to 90% of my staff are involved. So if I do a potluck this Friday for my staff and ask staff to bring in something to share, I have 80 to 90% of my teachers or staff members involved in it. And sometimes you can quickly figure it out. Like if you go to your local high school and say, hey, let's have school spirit week next week, and you ask teachers to dress up and only 20% dress up, you might have a tier one climate problem where people aren't really engaged and they're just like, well, I didn't know what to wear. I have nothing to wear. So I just showed up with nothing. It's like, well, wait a minute. I thought we all agreed to that. So yeah, I can share you some more stuff about it, but it's not rocket science. It's just a way to talk and to really measure right away. How are we doing? Because what we also know is that when we spend a lot of our time at the top of the triangle, that means our day was chaotic. It just means that we're constantly getting our teeth pulled. We're constantly at the dentist. And it's like, we're not spending a lot of time being proactive. And whenever we're spending time being reactive, it gets exhausting fast.
Yeah, the preparatory, proactive stuff, like you're saying, is not being put in action. And that's when it does get more hectic, stressful, all the above. And
Yeah.
so as I'm listening to this, I'm really kind of interested in how do you present this to schools, to people, to kids, to up and coming adults. And because I know you have a couple different things that you guys do, and that's why I want to hear about this. I know you have like the speaking stuff that you do, but I know you also have I'm gonna mess up the name, the LMS platform of the stuff you deliver to people. Is it ELS?
The human, no,
What is it called?
the, the Human Connection Hub, which is around social emotional learning. So SEL.
SEL. That's what
SEL.
I was
Yep.
looking for.
SEL. So down in Iowa, some of the terms you guys have is social emotional learning. You also have behavior health. And you also have social emotional, which we talked about. Then there's also the academic component of it. So when I think of a whole child, just like I think of a whole person, when I see you out in the community, you have a mom and dad. So I see you as a son. So I could say to you, like, how is he doing as a son? Then I see you like working for FedEx. I could be like, hey, how's he doing for his employee? He has a different relationship there. It's similar to when it comes around like the whole child. We want teachers and coaches and human beings to see our kids with social, emotional, behavior health, and academics. We want them to be a well-rounded person. And I think it goes back to what you were saying is sometimes we see kids that are very well-to-do coming from families with a lot of money, and academically they're great, but socially, emotionally, they're not. Like they can't,
Yeah.
they don't do very well in a social setting where they just have to be on their own and go up and talk to people And again, not categorize them, but they probably haven't had a lot of opportunities for that. Or if you put them at a carnival and said, hey, you have no money, but you have to find enough money to at least get a corn pop, or something, something you want to buy, they'd be like, I don't know. I'm just going to go ask people. Most people aren't going to give you money, right? You have to get a little creative. So, um, yeah. So the way we work with schools is a big component, again, going back to what we call as a TILL360 discovery meeting. And a discovery meeting is where I would reach out to you. You're the superintendent, or you reach out to us and say, hey, we need some help. We're really struggling with our students right now and kind of how they're treating each other or how they're behaving. So we listen to that. That's that listening, learning part of the 360. And then what we do is we talk about how we could maybe teach and inspire. Sometimes they want a keynote. So what it looks like, it's 90 minutes of time where we get with all staff. And that's where, again, we deliver a strong tier 1 message around the work that we're doing. So everyone's kind of getting like, one of the questions I ask people, are we getting better or bitter? So like after you and I've talked for 45 minutes to an hour today, let's just say at the end we hung up with each other, and then there was a person that said, hey, tell me, are you getting better or bitter from that conversation? And if you're like, God, I hope I never have to freaking talk to Curt again. I'm exhausted. He's annoying. And I'm just like, yeah, Gabe, he's like, he's going as fast as he can, but I don't think he really, whatever it was. But wouldn't that be really good feedback that we would receive
Yeah.
after interaction? And so sometimes we ask people that, like, is your team getting better or bitter? So, I know that high school football just got done down there. I do a lot of pheasant hunting down in
Yeah.
Carroll, Templeton,
Yeah.
Iowa. Uh, so I love coming
And
down there.
Carol,
But
yeah.
when it's football, it's football season. What's interesting about football season is that most of the community expects the football team to get better throughout the season. Yeah, they might be getting beat every game. I'm not expecting them to win, but we expect them to get more and more competitive as the season goes on. Same thing in our schools. Our schools should be getting better. Our teams should be getting better, and if they're not, we might have kind of some issues. And sometimes those issues are around relationships, and so it's that
Relationships
conversation.
around, because this is what I'm wondering, relationships around like the staff themselves, because it sounds like, just by what I'm interpreting, is like to help that up and come in, next generation, we could say. Uh, it sounds like it's more so to the staff, the teachers, because we're, like we said, we're all kind of teachers. It's giving them the message, and then that even if it's the keynote, it's to the teachers, and then that message, the school helps translate to the up to the youth, or that's so the relationships tying back to that. What
Yeah.
relationships is it
Yeah, I'd
talking
say
about?
that the majority of that I see it is that what sometimes they call it the top down is we start with the adults in the district, and we really give them a strong message around relationships foundation, the environment we want to create, and asking themselves, do you really want to do this? And if you do, let's get busy doing it. And so then that's around looking at practices and systems. So if I say to you, Gabe, hey, I want to get better at our staff building strong relationships with kids, what's something every staff member can do on a daily basis? And we have strategies and practices that we can share with them. One is schools that have teachers and adults that greet kids at the door have stronger foundation relationships than teachers that don't greet kids at the door. So what does that mean, greeting kid at the door? It means giving a compliment, using their name, getting excited that they're there. When I see that Gabe's a little bit tired and maybe still a little bit hungry, I'm like, hey, are you okay, Gabe? You look a little tired today. You're like, yeah, I didn't get something to eat. I just came from FedEx. I'm like, hey, I got an account. You go down and get yourself a Red Bull, or you go get yourself a Mountain Dew or whatever. Go get yourself a dinner roll, whatever is down there. You go to the cafeteria and get something. And what that does is that it shows you that I recognize you, not label you, not feel like, hey, you look like you're an at-risk learner today. Do you need to go to the office? Nope. I'm looking at building. So those are the skill sets that we come in with that will support staff. Now, sometimes what's interesting about adults is they're like, it's not us,
Yeah.
Curt. It's the kids. It's the kids. Like we want to have a strong school. And I'm like, okay, show me those. And then what is nice about TILL360 is we have speakers to come in and get kids excited about this and not feel shamed that they're maybe not. Sometimes I hear schools and it just makes me cringe, but I'm like, oh, you've never met our eighth grade group. Our eighth graders this year, they're the freaking worst, Curt. It's like, Oh, so how long have they been bad? I've been hearing them since fifth grade. They've been bad. And it's just like, do you think they want to be bad, or what can we do to intervene to maybe create a change? And so that's really where we spend our time, is like not admiring the problem, but acknowledging we're perfectly aligned to get the results that we're getting. So sometimes it's really hard for people to hear, but what you do today, you're perfectly aligned to get the results at the end of the day for what you did today. And so when we are in
Yeah.
chaos, like, I say to you, Gabe, like, how many times do you have to go out and start your car and your car doesn't start, that you're like, maybe I need a new car? Like, how many times, like, would it need to happen?
Well, in high school, that happened almost every morning for probably about a month or two. So but now, yeah, I mean, I don't want it to happen too many times before I need to at least get a new battery.
So there you go. Like, so in high school it happened a lot, and then how did you respond to that? Right? So it probably had an impact on you when your car didn't start. It probably had a negative impact on you to real recognize, like, wow, all I needed was a new battery, or all I needed was someone to give me some advice to not have that same experience. But there's sometimes where people are like, hey, Curt, it's not me, it's my car. I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, so you want to put blame on your car's not going to fix itself. And that's sometimes what I say to staff. Your students aren't going to fix themselves. They don't know they're broke. They don't they don't know that they're behind. They don't know any of that. So we, as the adults, the educated people, really have to spend the time around that to have that impact on kids. And we have to take ownership for it and say, hey, we're ready to make some changes.
It really does go back to that ownership and accountability piece, like you're saying, where yes, maybe the ball's in their court a little bit, but it ultimately does come back to like each one of us and like what we're doing and what we can see and where we can grow. And your piece of you might have to restate it one more time for me just so I fully grasp it. But the actions we take today and produce that result at the end of the day. Like what was that quote that you said, or what was that little concept? Because that was really good.
I got a yipping dog in the background. Sorry
That's
about
okay.
that.
I can
So,
barely hear it.
um, well, we're perfectly aligned to get the results that we're
Yep.
getting. So I mean, we're perfectly aligned. So today, I have several meetings, but then afterwards, if I decide to, go upstairs and make a bunch of popcorn and watch a movie, and my wife comes home and is like, "Oh my gosh, I thought you were going to clean the garage today," and it's like, "Oh, I was going to, but." And then so I do that again tomorrow and the next day, and again I never get kind of the results that I'm getting. So what I think sometimes we have to ask ourselves, why do we do certain things each and every day? What's the function of our behavior? And that's where I've really spent a lot of time in my journey in education, is looking at the function of discipline. It's like, let's say I ask you, Gabe, have you ever lied before to your parents? I know you
Yeah, I'm
have.
sure I
I know
have.
that I have too. So I always ask people, like when I'm doing a large audience, I'm like, how many of you have ever lied before? Raise your hand, and then I say, look around the room, and I'm like, anyone that's not raising their hand right now is lying now, because we've all lied,
Yeah.
right? We've all lied in our life, but it's not about that we did it, it's why we did it. Why might I lie today if I get my car and I'm going too fast and a police officer pulls me over and says, hey, do you know how fast you're going? I'm like, no, I don't, officer. When I do know, but I'm lying, why am I lying? Well, there's a function of my behavior, right? And so the function of my behavior is to escape. I want to get out of a ticket. And that's where I just tell people all the time that if we start looking at students' function of behavior, not just admiring the behavior as, non-engaged, disrespectful, defiant, disruptive, whatever those are, but why? What's the function of that behavior? As soon as you know that, you have the ability to influence change. And that's where we want to spend our time, is I can influence you today by the time that we spend together, and I can also influence you to have a worse day, right? I can make your day better, but I can't like say, hey, I'm going to make you do something, because as soon as I say that, you're going to like, no, you can't.
Hmm.
You can't make me do anything I want. You're right, but I can influence you, and you can influence me. So it's just some of the crazy things that we don't recognize as human beings, that we have the power of, and we always look at the power that we don't have. So I always hear people like, oh, kids these days, they're vaping. They are vaping, And back in my day, kids were chewing, tobacco, Skoal and Kodiak, and many of the wrestlers are doing it to lose weight. Before that, they used to have smoking pits in high school. So every generation has had to deal with nicotine.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how do you want to deal with it? Do you want to educate them around what vaping will do to them and so that they can make a personal choice? Or do you just want to say vaping is bad and we're not going to talk about it? And I think that we've learned our lesson on some of those things, but maybe we
Yeah,
haven't.
no, it's the exact thing of scolding someone or telling them no. They don't hear the no. They just want to go do it then because it's their own ability to do it. They want to show you. And then you were also saying it basically almost just comes back to like one way of perceiving it is like go towards like the pleasurable stuff or go away from the painful stuff, and it depends how it's interpreted and where you're moving towards. And that's what I think about quite a lot too, Curt, is just kind of those subtle things that it's not always talked about, not always shown, but I think they are very powerful. And as we wrap up here, I just wanted to, I always ask this, so I was always curious. You had like one biggest takeaway or message to drop for people, and then where can people find you? And then we'll probably close up shop here soon.
Yeah, I got at 10 o'clock. I got to run
Yes.
too. So
Okay.
I think I think the one thing that I'd just say, just be present. Open the door for someone at a Casey's or a Hy-Vee or at a Quick Trip. I start my mornings off when I can out at those places. I hold the door open for try to 4 or 5 people. The amount of people that say thank you just fills my bucket, recognizing that we still have a society that recognizes when you hold the door open for them. And some people don't recognize, and they're at a different place. But uh, how do you make sure that other people recognize that we're human beings and that in the long run, I'd rather have you call me on my phone than text me.
Yeah.
I'd rather hear from my kids to say, "Hey, Dad, I hope you have a great day," than just Snapchat. And I get that we have to adjust on some of that, but I just think around the human connection and that ability to just show gratitude. I mean, it reminds me of one of the things where I just love to know where Coach Schwartz, is that right, Coach
Yeah.
Schwartz, that you talked about? I'd love to know where he works, if he's still working, and to recognize today that, hey, I was talking to Gabe and he brought his name up of all the educators that impacted him, because I think that's where, again, we've lost gratitude, that we're not showing gratitude as much, but yet we're still expecting to receive gratitude. Um, People can reach us at TILL360.com. The nice part, my email is just Curt, C-U-R-T, at TILL360.com. Would love to connect with people. Love to be back on your show if there's time or another opening around certain things you talk about. I just want to say thank you for what you're doing and the role that you're playing when we think of the health of an athlete. My advice to parents is don't make the mistakes that I made.
Yeah.
I got really involved in my kids' athlete and I tried to provide the best I could. But where I could have used a lot more support is just reflection. Like when the game is over, the game is over. Stop harping on them. I was terrible with my kids in the car ride home. They all hated it. But I became that dad that was asking all these questions. Why didn't you shoot
Mhm.
this? Why didn't you do that? Versus just saying, hey, thanks for giving 100%. Let's hit Culver's and get something.
Yeah.
My kids are all grown up. Some of them played college basketball, some of them didn't. But what I can tell you is at the end of the day, no one's gonna ever go back and say, hey, how did they do in fifth grade traveling? How did they do in ninth grade traveling? None of the stats count. So just be that parent that you wish you had, and go from
Yeah, put
there.
it in perspective like that. That's great. And I appreciate all the kind
Yeah.
words, Curt. And yeah, this is just another avenue to give the value out to the people I'm doing the mental performance coaching with, helping them out with the athletes health. So I appreciate you a lot. And I know we both got to bounce, so we'll wrap it up. But thank you.